Behind the golden glow of Hollywood's most glamorous era, there were secrets the cameras never caught. The lights, the fame, the applause, all hid the rivalries that burned beneath the surface. And among the few who dared to speak his mind was Richard Widmark, a man respected not just for his acting, but for his brutal honesty. He wasn't one for gossip. He wasn't one for drama. But when Widmark opened up about the six actors he considered the most evil in old Hollywood, people listened. Because coming from him, those words carried weight. Why would a man so private, so disciplined, suddenly reveal the darkness behind Hollywood's charm? What did he see that others chose to ignore? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the truth Richard Widmark carried with him to the grave, the rivalries, betrayals, and raw emotion that shaped Hollywood's golden age. Before the controversies, before the whispers, there was just a boy from Minnesota with a dream. Richard Widmark wasn't born into fame, he built it with relentless work. He grew up during the Great Depression, moving from town to town as his father tried to keep the family afloat. What gave him comfort were the darkened movie theaters where his grandmother took him every week. That's where his obsession began. By the time he entered college, Widmark wasn't thinking about glamour or money. He wanted to be taken seriously. He studied law, dabbled in radio, and only found his calling when he stepped on stage. Acting to him wasn't about pretending. It was about truth. When Hollywood came knocking, he brought that same mindset with him. He wasn't a celebrity, he was a craftsman. Every line, every scene mattered. That's why his first big break, Kiss of Death in 1947, hit audiences like a thunderclap. As the psychotic killer Tommy Udo, Widmark terrified millions with a single maniacal laugh, a sound that defined film noir itself. He won awards, he earned respect, but more importantly, he built a reputation. Richard Widmark didn't fake it. And that's what made his later comments about certain Hollywood stars so explosive. When a man like Widmark called someone evil, he wasn't being dramatic, he was being honest. But who were these actors, and what did they do to earn a place on his secret blacklist? Frank Sinatra, the charmer who crossed the line. The first name that Widmark ever admitted truly infuriated him was none other than Frank Sinatra. Sinatra was Hollywood's golden boy, smooth voice, charming smile, adored by everyone from studio heads to presidents. But behind the charm, Widmark saw something else: arrogance. The two men worked together in the 1968 crime drama, The Detective. From the start, it was chaos. Sinatra would stroll onto set hours late, shrug off rehearsals, and insist that scenes be rewritten on the spot. To most people, it was just Sinatra being Sinatra, a star who played by his own rules. But to Widmark, it was disrespect. Acting was sacred, not casual, and showing up unprepared was the ultimate insult to the craft. Crew members later recalled that Widmark's frustration was obvious. He kept his composure, but the tension in the air was thick. One assistant director said, "You could tell Dick saw Frank as all charm and no dedication." Off camera, Sinatra's magnetism couldn't save him. Widmark reportedly told a friend, "Charisma's a cheap substitute for character." It wasn't hatred, it was disappointment. Widmark admired hard work, and he saw none of it in Sinatra's approach. And yet, Sinatra wasn't the only icon to face Widmark's quiet wrath. The next man on his list was someone Widmark actually admired, at least at first: Marlon Brando, the chaos of genius. Marlon Brando was unlike anyone Hollywood had ever seen. His raw, unfiltered emotion changed acting forever. He didn't just play characters, he became them. But that same intensity made him impossible for traditional actors like Widmark to respect. Brando refused to learn his lines. He mumbled through rehearsals, improvised entire scenes, and often left co-stars hanging in silence while he searched for truth. To Brando, acting was art. To Widmark, it was discipline. The clash between those philosophies became legendary, even though the two men never worked on the same film. Widmark once said, "Some actors need chaos to create. I prefer focus." Everyone in Hollywood knew who he meant. It wasn't hatred. Widmark acknowledged Brando's brilliance, but he couldn't stand the carelessness that came with it. To him, Brando represented the beginning of a dangerous shift, where ego replaced preparation and fame replaced craft. When word spread that Widmark considered Brando one of the most destructive influences on Hollywood professionalism, it shocked people. But to those who knew him, it made sense. Because if Widmark hated anything, it was disrespect. And that included disrespecting your own talent. But the next name on his list wasn't about philosophy. It was about vanity, pure and simple. Tony Curtis, the man in the mirror. Tony Curtis had movie star looks, a dazzling smile, and an ego to match. When he worked with Widmark on The Long Ships in 1964, the tension was immediate. Curtis was obsessed with his appearance, constantly checking his reflection, fixing his hair, and flirting with the crew. Widmark, meanwhile, arrived on set early, lines memorized, ready to work. To him, Curtis was everything wrong with the new Hollywood, all surface, no substance. One crew member later said Widmark didn't hate Tony for who he was, but for who he pretended to be. Curtis saw acting as performance. Widmark saw it as responsibility. They were two different worlds colliding under the same camera lights. The result? Silent hostility. They barely spoke off set, and during filming, Widmark's professionalism only made Curtis more insecure. Years later, Curtis joked about how serious Widmark always seemed, saying, "I don't think the man ever smiled." Widmark's reply? "I smile when the work deserves it." It was cold, but it was honest. If vanity bothered Widmark, laziness drove him crazy. And that brings us to the next actor, a man whose carefree attitude was legendary. Robert Mitchum, the carefree rebel. Robert Mitchum was the definition of cool. Sleepy eyes, slow drawl, and a bad boy charm that made him irresistible. He famously said, "I just show up, hit my mark, and say my lines." To the public, that sounded like effortless confidence. To Widmark, it was blasphemy. Widmark believed every scene deserved everything you had. So hearing a peer openly brag about coasting through performances made his blood boil. They weren't rivals on screen, but Widmark often used Mitchum as an example of what he didn't respect in Hollywood, the actors who confused natural charisma with genuine effort. After watching one of Mitchum's films, Widmark reportedly muttered, "You don't coast your way to greatness." He wasn't wrong. Mitchum's casual brilliance often overshadowed the discipline behind the craft. But as critical as Widmark could be, his harshest judgments were saved for those he considered equals, the men who matched his intensity, his pride, and his fire. And one of them was a shock to everyone. Kirk Douglas, Clash of Titans. To outsiders, Richard Widmark and Kirk Douglas looked like brothers in arms, two strong-willed, commanding actors who ruled the screen. But behind the scenes, they couldn't stand each other. Douglas was larger than life, loud, confident, and always determined to dominate every scene he was in. He'd push for retakes, raise his voice, and fight directors for creative control. Widmark, who valued subtlety and respect, saw that as pure ego. He once said, "There's only room for one storm in a scene, and Kirk brings the whole hurricane." It wasn't just competition, it was a battle of philosophies. Douglas believed in overpowering a scene. Widmark believed in disappearing into it. Their mutual dislike became an open secret. When Widmark turned down a major role opposite Douglas, it raised eyebrows. He simply said, "I don't need to prove who's louder." Yet, for all the tension, Widmark never insulted Douglas publicly. He didn't do gossip columns. He didn't spread rumors. He just walked away, quietly, but firmly. And that was his pattern. Widmark's issue was never personal. It was about professionalism, respect, and the fading code of honor that once defined Hollywood's best actors. But what these feuds revealed went far beyond personality clashes. They exposed the cracks in the Golden Age itself. Hollywood's Golden Age looked perfect from the outside. Glittering premieres, elegant stars, and timeless films. But behind closed doors, it was ruthless. Studios owned your image. Agents controlled your every move. Directors pushed actors to exhaustion. In that world, someone like Richard Widmark was an anomaly, a man who refused to play the fame game. He didn't chase attention, didn't attend endless parties, and didn't build fake friendships for publicity. He once said, "If you need to be famous to feel alive, you're already dead." That philosophy made him both respected and feared. Studio executives loved his reliability, but hated his honesty. He wouldn't flatter people to climb higher, and he wouldn't compromise the story for vanity. So when he finally named the 6 actors he couldn't stand, Frank Sinatra, Marlon Brando, Tony Curtis, Robert Mitchum, Kirk Douglas, and one more rarely discussed, it wasn't about gossip. It was about principle. He believed those men represented everything dangerous about Hollywood's evolution, the shift from art to image, from dedication to ego. Widmark's criticisms weren't fueled by jealousy or bitterness. They were warnings. He saw an industry losing its soul, one careless performance at a time. And the saddest part? He was right. By the late 1960s, Hollywood had changed forever. The old guard was fading, replaced by younger, wilder stars who treated acting as rebellion. Widmark watched quietly from the sidelines, disillusioned but not surprised. But despite his reputation for being harsh, Widmark had a softer side that almost no one saw. To fans, Richard Widmark was the tough guy, the hardened cowboy, the relentless detective, the unflinching hero. But off camera, he was gentle, deeply loyal, and surprisingly shy. He married once to his college sweetheart, Jean Hazelwood, and stayed faithful for over 50 years, a near miracle in Hollywood. When asked once if he ever looked at other women, he laughed and said, "I happen to like my wife a lot." He hated parties, hated attention, and avoided interviews whenever possible. While other actors built mansions in Beverly Hills, Widmark preferred a quiet ranch life, spending his days reading, gardening, and teaching his daughter how to ride horses. Those who worked with him often said the same thing. He was all steel on camera, all kindness off it. And when tragedy struck, when his brother died young, when his mother passed, and when his wife fell ill with Alzheimer's, Widmark disappeared from Hollywood entirely to care for her. He gave up his career without hesitation. He never complained, never sought sympathy. When she passed away, he told a friend, "I've had my fame. Now I just want peace." That humility, that devotion, was what truly set him apart from the evil actors he once condemned. Because to Widmark, success wasn't about how many fans you had. It was about how you treated people when no one was watching. In the end, Richard Widmark lived to be 93, long enough to watch the industry evolve beyond recognition. Superheroes replaced cowboys, studios gave way to franchises, and the art he loved, the discipline, the storytelling, the honesty, faded into the background. But those who knew him say that even in his final years, he still believed in one thing, that acting was a form of truth. When asked once what made a great actor, he quietly said respect. For the story, for the audience, for the people who stand beside you in the scene. That's why his list of evil actors mattered. It wasn't about hatred. It was a man watching integrity slip away. Sinatra's arrogance, Brando's chaos, Curtis's vanity, Mitchum's carelessness, Douglas's dominance. Each one reflected something Widmark feared would consume the industry. Ego over art. And in a strange way, his honesty kept that memory alive. Because every generation needs a reminder that talent without respect is hollow. When Richard Widmark passed away in 2008, his funeral was small, quiet, exactly how he wanted. No cameras, no press, just a handful of close friends, including Sidney Poitier, who once said, "Richard was the only man in Hollywood who never pretended to be something he wasn't." Maybe that's why, even now, his story still matters. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't gentle in his opinions, but he was real. And in a place built on illusion, that made him rare. So when Richard Widmark revealed the 6 most evil actors of Hollywood's golden age, maybe evil wasn't the right word. Maybe what he really meant was lost. Because for Widmark, the real evil wasn't in the people, it was in forgetting what made the work matter in the first place. Hollywood will always chase fame, controversy, and spectacle. But men like Richard Widmark remind us that underneath the glitter, there once was grit and integrity. And maybe that's why his story still feels timeless. Because no matter how much the industry changes, audiences can still spot the truth. Just like Widmark said you could spot a good director in 5 minutes. You can tell a good actor the same way. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden side of Hollywood's legends, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because next time, we're diving into another forgotten feud that changed an entire era of cinema. One so shocking, it almost destroyed a studio. Until then, remember, behind every spotlight lies a shadow. And sometimes, that's where the real story begins.